The Mist Over Bastogne. An army lost in a supernatural fog. Have you ever heard a story so strange, so chilling, that even the coldest of skeptics would be forced to second-guess their beliefs? A story that begins in the heat of battle, but takes a dark, supernatural turn, impossible to explain by any logic or reason? Well, this is one of those stories. Imagine being thrust into the chaos of war, guns blazing, the night filled with screams and explosions. But then, it all stops. The sounds, the fear, the battle itself. In the fog of war, soldiers fighting for their lives encounter something impossible. Something that changes them forever. It was the dead of night in the heart of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, 1944. The American soldiers were already pushed to their limits, trapped, starving, and surrounded by the relentless German forces. But as the cold winter wind howled through the trees, something else emerged from the darkness. At first it was small, a flicker in the corner of their eyes, a figure standing just beyond the light of the campfires. Nothing too alarming, just a shadow. But that's when things started to change. One soldier, a man we'll call Private John Miller, saw it first. He swore it wasn't a German soldier, nor was it an Allied soldier. It looked like a soldier, but not from the present. Not even from the war at hand. This figure was different. Its uniform was old, the fabric torn and worn, and its eyes empty, hollow. As he stared into the figure's gaze, everything went silent. The sounds of war, the cries of men, the roaring of tanks, they all faded. And in that silence, a sense of dread seeped in, unlike anything he had ever felt. His heart raced, his breath quickened, but no sound left his mouth. "Did you see it?" he whispered, turning to his fellow soldiers. But no one answered. It was too late. The figure was gone, swallowed by the fog, as if it had never been there at all. Was it a ghost? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear? Or was it something more? That night, more strange occurrences would follow, each one more unsettling than the last. As the fog descended further upon the battlefield, the soldiers found themselves trapped not just by the enemy, but by something far more terrifying. Something that could not be explained by any earthly means. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was something beyond. The only thing that remained was the question. What were they facing? And why did it seem like this force was aware of them, following them with an unspoken purpose? Keep watching, because this story doesn't end there. It's just beginning, and the answers may haunt you long after. It wasn't just John Miller who saw the figure in the mist that night. Soon, others began reporting similar strange sightings, flickers of movement just beyond the trees, whispers carried by the wind, shadows that didn't belong to anything. It was as if the very ground beneath their feet was alive with the weight of something unseen. The first signs were small, subtle. At first, you might have written it off as the effects of the battle. The fog that wrapped the forest like a thick blanket. The exhaustion that blurred the lines between the real and the imagined. But as the hours wore on, the unease became undeniable. Private Charles Finnegan, a young man from Ohio, was the first to hear the sounds. At first, it seemed like the distant rumblings of thunder, but there was something wrong with the way the sound moved. Unpredictable, almost like the very ground was trembling. Finnegan stood still, straining his ears, and as he looked around, the hairs on his neck stood up. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't an explosion, it was something else entirely, something rhythmic, almost deliberate. A sound that came closer, then receded, as if playing with him. "Sergeant, do you hear that?" Finnegan called out, his voice trembling. But his sergeant just shook his head, too tired and too worn out to care about anything except surviving the night. And yet Finnegan couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting, watching. Later, as the fog thickened even further, the soldiers began seeing things that couldn't be explained by their tired minds. Strange lights would flicker in the trees, glowing with an otherworldly intensity. One soldier, a burly man named Sergeant Thompson, swore he saw a figure standing just outside their camp, bathed in a ghostly light. It wasn't one of the enemy, and it wasn't one of them. It stood still, its back turned, as if unaware of the soldiers just a few feet away. When Thompson moved closer, it vanished. Just the fog playing tricks on you, he convinced himself, though his words rang hollow even to him. But the question lingered. If it was just the fog, why did the light feel so real? And that's when things began to spiral. The fog, once just a nuisance to the soldiers, now felt like something alive. It moved unpredictably, curling around their feet like it was trying to hold them in place. It blocked their sight, making them feel lost, disoriented. No matter which way they turned, the fog clung to them, whispering, calling them deeper into the trees. Then there were the sounds. Voices, distant and disembodied, like they were coming from the very air around them. The soldiers could not pinpoint the source, but they were everywhere. Some soldiers swore they could hear the cries of men who had died long ago, their pleas for help caught in the gusting wind. Others heard whispers, too faint to understand, but enough to send shivers down their spines. But the most terrifying sign was yet to come. Private Miller, still reeling from the figure he saw earlier, became obsessed with the idea that something was wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the forest itself was waiting for something. When he ventured further into the trees, he found something that should have been impossible. A mark. A symbol etched deep into the trunk of a tree, as if something, had carved it there. The symbol wasn't anything he recognized from his training, nor from the books of military tactics he had studied back home. It was ancient, foreign, and ominous. Miller's hands trembled as he traced the symbol, and just as his fingers brushed the cold bark, a chill swept through him. Was it a warning? A sign? Or something far worse? These were the first undeniable signs that something was out of place in Bastogne, something far beyond the normal horrors of war. The soldiers were no longer fighting a battle with weapons and strategy. They were fighting against something that could not be defeated by any means they understood. And the worst part was, no one had any idea what they were up against. But the fog, the whispers, the strange symbols, it was all just the beginning. What they didn't know was that the real horror was still waiting to reveal itself. The battlefield was littered with debris, but it was also marked by something else. A presence, an intangible force that clung to the men like a second skin. Some soldiers spoke of it in hushed whispers, others ignored it, too afraid to acknowledge what they couldn't explain. But one man couldn't ignore it. He couldn't forget it. And perhaps no one else should have either. Private John Miller was the one who survived. The only one. He had seen things that night, things that had etched themselves into his mind. And yet when the battle ended and the dust settled, no one seemed to believe him. No one wanted to believe him. Maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe a trick of the fog, they told him, patting him on the back, telling him to forget about it. But Miller couldn't forget. Not the figure, not the whispering voices, not the strange, unsettling feeling that still gripped his chest every time he closed his eyes. Years had passed since the battle, but the memories, vivid and haunting, never left him. Miller lived a quiet life now, far from the front lines. But when the nightmares began again, when the shadows from that fog crept back into his dreams, he knew he couldn't keep it all locked away anymore. It started one late evening, a few days after he had settled into his new life. He had been at the bar, just a few drinks to numb the edges of the day, when an old man approached him. The man had been watching Miller for a while, his gaze sharp, as if he knew something. The old man's eyes gleamed as he sat down next to him. "You were there, weren't you?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Miller froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The man knew. The memories, the strange occurrences. They all came rushing back in that instant. "How do you know? About Bastogne?" Miller asked, his voice trembling. The man leaned in closer, his breath heavy with the scent of tobacco. "I've heard stories, strange stories about that place. People who came back, and people who didn't. I know what happened there. I know what you saw." Miller's heart pounded. He had never told anyone, not a single soul. "Then you know what I saw that night," Miller murmured. The old man nodded. "I do, but there's more. Much more. You're not the only one who saw things. And I can tell you, what's happening now is just the beginning." Miller looked into the old man's eyes, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the truth settle on his shoulders. Whatever had followed him from Bastogne hadn't gone away. It was still out there, still watching. The fog, the strange figures, they were not just part of his past. They were part of something much bigger. The man stood to leave, his face grave. "You're not alone, Private. They're still out there. But if you want to understand it, you need to go back. Back to Bastogne. Back to the place where it all began." Miller didn't have the luxury of second-guessing. Something deep inside him told him that the time had come to face it all, again. It wasn't long before Miller realized that the nightmares were not just dreams. They were a warning. And soon, the events that had once been hidden in the fog of his memory came rushing back to life. The fog, the strange figures, the whispers. They all returned, one by one, each more vivid than before. At first, Miller thought it was all in his head. But then, things began to happen again. It was a quiet night in the woods. Miller had returned to the area near Bastogne, trying to confront the memories he had buried for so long. He was alone, or so he thought, as the dense mist began to roll in. It wasn't like any fog he had seen before. It wasn't the thick, wet kind that clung to everything, but something colder, drier. It moved with a will of its own, twisting and turning in the trees as though it had a mind of its own. Then the sounds began. At first, faint, just a rustle here and there. But as the seconds passed, they grew louder, sharper, more frantic. Footsteps. They echoed from all directions, but there was no one there. Miller froze, his breath caught in his chest. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the ground. And that's when he saw it again. A figure emerged from the fog. At first it was nothing more than a silhouette, tall, with broad shoulders. But as it came closer, Miller could see the details: the tattered uniform, the unshaven face, and the empty, hollow eyes. It was like seeing the ghost of a soldier who had died in the battle long ago. The figure moved toward him with a slow, deliberate pace, its eyes fixed on him. Miller's heart raced in his chest. He knew what he had to do, but his body refused to obey. "What do you want?" Miller whispered, his voice shaky. The figure stopped. It tilted its head, as if considering his words, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished back into the fog, leaving Miller standing there, breathless and shaken. But that wasn't the end. No, not by a long shot. As Miller turned to leave, he caught sight of something else, a strange, glowing light in the distance. It wasn't from a campfire, and it wasn't from a flashlight. This light was unnatural, pulsating with an eerie rhythm. His heart pounded harder now, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Miller knew something was watching him, waiting for him to make his move. He had come to this place to find answers, but it was clear that the answers would not come easily. Something was here in these woods, something he couldn't escape. And with each passing moment, the tension tightened, like a noose slowly closing around his throat. As Miller ventured deeper into the woods, every step felt heavier, as though the very earth beneath him was pulling him down. The fog closed in tighter, suffocating his senses. He had been here before. He could feel it in his bones, the familiarity of it all, the way the trees loomed like dark sentinels. This place had become a nightmare he could never escape, no matter how far he ran. But now, he needed answers. The haunting vision from the past, the figure in the fog, wasn't just a hallucination, he realized. It was connected to something. But what? What did it mean? Why did it only show itself now, years after the battle had ended? His feet carried him through the mist to a spot he recognized, a ridge overlooking the battlefield. The place where they had fought tooth and nail, side by side, struggling against impossible odds. The same spot where the fog had first swallowed them up, where the first ghostly figure had appeared. He dropped to his knees, trying to gather his thoughts, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had to remember. There was something important, something that had happened back then, that tied all of this together. The memories flooded back. The days of intense combat were a blur, but some things stood out. Small details that didn't seem to fit. He remembered a conversation with Sergeant Thompson, who had grown unusually quiet in the days leading up to the battle. He recalled the fear in the old man's eyes when he spoke about the curse that had haunted the area for centuries. Thompson had warned them, even laughed it off at first, but the more Miller thought about it, the more he realized that Thompson had known something that the rest of them hadn't. Maybe he hadn't believed it at the time, but now it all made sense. The strange markings in the woods, the eerie symbols they found etched into the trees. Was it all tied to the land itself? A memory tugged at the edge of his mind. A conversation he'd overheard. Not just the Germans were fighting, Thompson had said to another soldier. This place, Bastogne, it's cursed. There's a reason no one speaks of it. A reason why soldiers always come back. Different. But what could that reason be? Was it the spirits of the fallen soldiers? Or something more sinister? Suddenly, a thought struck him. What if Thompson had been trying to warn them about something that couldn't be defeated with bullets? What if the forces they had been fighting weren't of this world? Miller stood up, his resolve hardening. He had to uncover what had happened, what the others had missed. As he continued to search the area, a new realization dawned on him. The strange phenomena. The fog, the figures, the whispers, they weren't random. They were connected to a time, to a place, to an event that had happened long before the war. An event no one had ever fully understood. What had happened here before the battle? What dark history had been buried in the land of Bastogne? The answers were buried somewhere in the past, and he was determined to dig them up. Miller had always known that the past had a way of catching up with you, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The moment he made that realization, that the strange occurrences in the woods were tied to something deeper, something ancient, was the moment everything began to shift. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet, and the air grew thicker, colder, heavier. It was as if the fog itself was alive, pressing in on him from every direction. He heard it again, the soft, slow footsteps in the distance. But this time they weren't faint. They were close, very close. Miller turned quickly, scanning the dense fog, but saw nothing. Still, the footsteps continued. Closer, closer. Then, without warning, a figure stepped out of the mist. It wasn't the same as before. This figure wasn't a soldier, at least not one who belonged to any army he recognized. This was something different, something older. The figure was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered rags that fluttered as if caught in an invisible wind. Its face was hidden in the shadows of its hood, but there was a distinct presence about it. A feeling that ran through Miller's veins like ice water, freezing him in place. For a moment, neither moved. Time seemed to stretch, the silence swallowing them whole. The footsteps had stopped. All that remained was the unblinking, endless stare of the figure. Then, just as Miller thought he might faint from the weight of it all, the figure spoke. "You've come for the truth," it said, its voice raspy and distant, like a memory fading into the dark. Miller's heart raced. The figure's words sent a shiver through him. How did it know? What truth? "What do you want from me?" Miller demanded, his voice shaking, though he did his best to sound firm. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, its movements slow, deliberate. "I am not who you think, but I am who you need." Miller took a step back. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But his feet felt frozen, as though the figure's presence had bound him in place. Suddenly, the figure extended a hand, and the mist swirled around it like a vortex, sucking the light out of the air. Miller could barely see as the figure stepped closer. Then, the air grew still. The figure spoke again, its voice low and grave. "The spirits of the past are restless. They do not rest as you think. They are bound by something, something forgotten, and now, they will return." Miller's mind spun. Spirits? What was it talking about? "What are you?" he whispered, his throat dry. The figure's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the wind. "We are what you seek, and what you fear." And just like that, the figure was gone. The mist closed in, and for a moment Miller was left alone, standing on the ridge, his mind reeling. What had just happened? Was this some kind of warning? Or was it something more? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. He was not alone. The spirits, the soldiers from the past, they were still out there, watching, waiting. And now they wanted something from him. As he stood in the silence that followed, Miller could feel it. Something had changed. The tension had reached a new height, and whatever force was behind these events was now far more present than it had ever been before. The night was still heavy with the weight of unanswered questions, but Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was inching closer to the truth. He had seen the figure, the strange, otherworldly soldier who had whispered cryptic words into his ear. It was an encounter that defied logic, but Miller was no fool. He had spent enough time in the heart of war to know that not all things could be explained by reason or science. But now he had to explain this, had to make sense of it somehow. The only problem? No one was going to believe him. No one back home would buy his story about a haunted battlefield, about ghostly soldiers rising from the mist. They would laugh him off, maybe even call him crazy. But what if it wasn't just a hallucination? What if there was something far darker at play here, something tied to the very land of Bastogne itself? The next day, Miller decided to meet with someone who might know more, someone who had been here long before him, long before the battle. A local historian, an elderly man named Jean-Claude Lefebvre, had lived in the area for decades. Jean-Claude had often spoken of the old legends that surrounded Bastogne. Tales of an ancient curse, of soldiers from past wars who never left. According to him, there were things in the woods that people didn't understand, things hidden deep within the earth itself. Jean-Claude met him in a small, dimly lit room above his family's house, surrounded by shelves filled with dusty books and artifacts from the war. It looked like the kind of place where time stood still, frozen in the past, just like the stories Lefebvre would tell. "Private Miller, I presume?" Jean-Claude greeted him, his sharp eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and something deeper. "You've come to learn more about the past, have you?" "I've seen things," Miller replied, his voice low, almost reluctant to say the words aloud. "Things that don't make sense. Things from the war. Things from before the war." Jean-Claude nodded gravely, as though he had been expecting this. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I've been waiting for someone to come asking about this. The fog in Bastogne. The spirits. These are not stories I tell lightly, but you are right to seek the truth. And it's a truth that is far darker than any you could imagine." Jean-Claude moved to a nearby shelf and pulled out a leather-bound journal, worn with age. He opened it to a page filled with faded writing and maps of the battlefield. Before the war, there were ancient rumors about this place, about the land itself. Some believed the area was cursed, bound by the souls of fallen soldiers. But it goes deeper than that. You see, Bastogne has always been a crossroads, a place where forces beyond our comprehension have converged. And it's not just the soldiers who were killed here. It's something else. Miller leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you mean? What else?" Jean-Claude tapped the journal with his finger, his expression intense. "The soldiers, the spirits, they were never meant to leave. But when the war came, they became trapped between the worlds. And now, as you've seen, they are restless. They're trying to break free, and that's why the fog returns. That's why the figures appear." Miller's stomach twisted as he absorbed the words. "You mean to say that these aren't just hallucinations? They're real?" Jean-Claude looked him dead in the eye. "What's real? The mind plays tricks, yes, but some things defy explanation. Some things are beyond us. The fog, the soldiers, the whispers. They are all part of something that happened long before the war, something forgotten. And now, it is waking up." Miller stood up, his thoughts racing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but it only made the mystery even more terrifying. Could it be possible that this place, Bastogne, was somehow caught in a loop? A loop where the dead never truly died, and the living were bound to relive the horrors of the past? Before Miller could speak, Jean-Claude handed him the journal, his hands trembling. "Take this. It's all I have. But be warned, once you begin this journey, there's no going back. The past is alive here, Private. And it doesn't want to be forgotten." Armed with Jean-Claude's journal, Miller felt a renewed sense of urgency. The words echoed in his mind as he left the historian's house. The past is alive here, and it doesn't want to be forgotten. What did that mean? What exactly was this past that Jean-Claude had been speaking of? And why did it seem to be linked to the very fabric of the land itself? The next few days were a blur of research. Late nights spent poring over the journal's pages and old war records. But nothing prepared Miller for what happened next. One evening, as Miller ventured further into the woods, the fog seemed thicker than ever before. It swallowed the ground beneath his feet, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of him. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, twisted and gnarled by the weight of time. As Miller walked deeper into the forest, he noticed something new, something that wasn't there before. Strange markings appeared on the bark of several trees, identical to the symbol he had found earlier. They were carved with precision, as though someone, or something, had marked them deliberately. His pulse quickened as he traced one of the markings with his fingers. The texture of the bark felt rough, as though the marks had been made recently, not decades ago. But how could that be? The trees around him were ancient, untouched by time. No human hand had been here in ages. And then, as he stepped back, he noticed something even stranger. In the distance, just beyond the trees, a faint light flickered. It wasn't a campfire, it wasn't a flashlight, it was too fluid, too unnatural. The light moved, swaying gently, as if it were being carried by an unseen hand. Without thinking, Miller began moving toward the light. His heart raced, the anticipation building with each step. What was this? What had he stumbled upon? As he approached, the fog seemed to part slightly, revealing an old stone structure, a monument that Miller had never seen before. Covered in moss and half buried in the earth, the monument looked ancient, predating even the oldest of war records. It wasn't just a marker, it was a doorway. Carved into the stone was the same symbol that had appeared on the trees. The markings were not random, they were a map that led to something hidden, something forgotten. Miller's hand hovered over the symbol, his breath shallow. The air around him grew colder, the fog swirling tighter, pulling him into the darkness. And then, the whispers came. They were faint at first, like a murmur carried on the wind. But as Miller stepped closer, the voices grew louder, more distinct. The words were ancient, spoken in a language he couldn't understand. And yet somehow, he felt as though they were speaking directly to him. "You shouldn't have come," the voices seemed to warn. "It's too late." Miller's pulse thundered in his ears. Was this the moment he'd been waiting for? Was this the key to unlocking the mystery of Bastogne, the supernatural fog, and the restless spirits? Or had he just walked into a trap that had been waiting for him all along? He didn't have time to think. The door was there, the symbol beckoning him to step forward. The past was alive, and it was waiting. Miller's hand trembled as it hovered over the ancient stone monument, the strange symbol etched deep into its surface. The fog swirled tighter around him, pressing in like the walls of a tomb. The voices in the air grew louder, more urgent, and yet the words still eluded him. "You shouldn't have come." The warning echoed, as though spoken from the very earth beneath him. With a deep breath, Miller pushed his doubts aside and pressed his fingers into the stone, the cold surface biting into his skin. In that moment, the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, the earth groaning, almost as if waking from a long slumber. Then, a crack. A faint tremor ran through the ground, and the monument before him seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The fog parted just enough for him to see. There was something inside. A passageway, half buried beneath layers of moss and soil, leading down into the darkness below. It was as if the earth had opened up, inviting him into the depths. Miller's heart raced, but a strange force, something he couldn't explain, drove him forward. He stepped into the passage, the air growing colder with each step. As he descended into the darkened tunnel, the walls seemed to close in around him, and the whispers grew louder, louder still, until they were no longer distant voices but something right beside him, pressing in on all sides. "It is too late," they whispered. His mind reeled. Was he being drawn deeper into something beyond human comprehension? The further he walked, the more the passage seemed to stretch, the walls changing, as though he were no longer walking through an ordinary cave, but through some otherworldly place, somewhere that defied space and time. And then he saw it. A figure, standing at the end of the tunnel, just beyond the flickering light of his torch. It was tall, cloaked in tattered robes that seemed to shift and ripple, as though woven from shadows themselves. Its face, if it could be called that, was hidden beneath the hood, but its presence was unmistakable. Cold, ancient, powerful. Miller stopped dead in his tracks. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to flee, but his feet wouldn't move. The figure's eyes flickered open. Not human eyes, not even eyes at all. Just voids, dark pits that seemed to pull in the light itself. And from those eyes, Miller felt the weight of an unspoken truth, a truth that carried the weight of centuries. "Who are you?" Miller finally managed to whisper, his voice barely audible against the growing sound of the whispers around him. The figure raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers pointing toward him. "You are the one who has disturbed the balance," it said, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You should never have sought the truth. Now, you will understand why we remain forgotten." Miller's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward, its cloak swirling around it, as if it were part of the very fog that surrounded the land. The temperature dropped even further, and Miller felt his body freeze, not from the cold, but from sheer terror. The figure was closer now, so close he could almost feel its presence press against his chest, suffocating him. And then, the figure vanished. Just like that. Gone. For a moment, Miller stood alone in the darkness, his mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't sure if it was the manifestation of his fear, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or something far worse. But he knew one thing. Whatever this was, it was real, and it was waiting for him. The whispers still echoed in his mind as he turned and began to make his way back to the surface. They were not just warnings anymore. They were threats. The forces of the past were not just lingering. They were watching him, waiting. And no matter how far he ran, they were always there, just beyond the edge of his sight. Miller emerged from the dark tunnel into the dim light of the forest, his head spinning, his heart still pounding from the encounter below. He had seen the figure, the one that haunted his every thought. And it wasn't just a spirit from the past. It was something ancient, something that existed beyond time itself. But as he stepped back into the fog, a strange calm washed over him. The whispers had stopped, but the presence of something unseen lingered in the air. The fog had closed in again, wrapping itself around him like an old friend, familiar and suffocating. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been alone for a long time. Something was following him, watching him. And now, the question that had gnawed at him since the beginning, "Can I escape?" loomed larger than ever. He started walking, but the mist seemed to close around him tighter with each step. The path in front of him began to twist, and what had once been familiar, the trees, the rocks, now seemed foreign, warped by the fog. No matter how many steps he took, the forest remained unchanged. He was trapped. There was no way out. His thoughts began to spiral. Was this real? Was he losing his grip on reality? Or had he stumbled into a place where time and space didn't follow the rules? The fog shifted, swirling around him as if it had a life of its own, pulling him deeper into the woods. The air grew thick with an oppressive weight, and Miller's chest tightened. He could hear footsteps again, soft, slow, and deliberate, moving just behind him. Miller spun around, expecting to see something, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. His heart raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps. It was all in his head, he told himself. It had to be, but then he heard it again, louder this time. Footsteps. No, not footsteps. The sound of someone dragging their feet. Miller's blood ran cold. In the distance, a figure emerged. This one was different from the last. More human, more familiar. But it was still wrong. The figure moved toward him, dragging its leg with each step, its face obscured by a hood. But as it drew closer, Miller could see the details. Its uniform, torn and stained, was from the war, the very war he had fought in. The figure looked like a soldier, one who had died long ago. "Get away!" Miller shouted, his voice cracking. He reached for his weapon, but the figure didn't stop. It kept moving forward, its steps slow and deliberate, dragging itself closer to him. The fog thickened. The air became dense with an overwhelming sense of doom. The figure stopped just in front of Miller, its hollow eyes staring at him through the shadows. It opened its mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a chilling, guttural noise echoed from the figure's throat, something between a groan and a scream. Miller stumbled back, his heart hammering against his chest. Suddenly, the world seemed to spin, the forest swirling into an incomprehensible blur. The figure was gone, swallowed by the fog. But the feeling of something lurking, of something watching, never left. Miller was no longer sure if he was running from something real or if it was all just a twisted creation of his own fear. But one thing was clear. Whatever force haunted Bastogne was not finished with him. It would never let him go. And now, Miller realized, there was no escaping it. Miller's mind was clouded. Every step he took through the fog felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the world itself was pressing in on him. The figures, the whispers, they had all become a part of his reality. He couldn't escape them, no matter how hard he tried. And yet, amidst the growing chaos, a small part of him still clung to the hope that somewhere, deep within this nightmare, there was a key to understanding it all. But where could it be? The fog, the figures, the strange monuments, they were just pieces of a puzzle that Miller couldn't even begin to put together. It was in that moment of desperation that he remembered Jean-Claude Lefebvre's warning. The past is alive here, and it doesn't want to be forgotten. The past. There had to be something hidden in the history of Bastogne, something that tied the supernatural events to the land itself. Miller's gut told him that he needed to find one last clue, one final piece of evidence that would explain why the fog, the spirits, the figures, and everything in between had come alive. Miller returned to the old monument, the one he had found beneath the earth in the hidden passage. He knew he couldn't leave until he uncovered its full meaning. The fog was even thicker now, swirling around the monument like an unholy presence. As Miller approached, the markings on the stone seemed to shimmer in the dim light, glowing faintly as though they were alive. He felt drawn to them, as if they were pulling him in, beckoning him to decipher their meaning. Taking a deep breath, Miller ran his fingers over the symbols again, tracing their contours with a sense of urgency. He had to understand them. And then, as his fingers brushed the stone, something shifted. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the monument groaned as if it were awakening from a deep slumber. Miller stumbled back, his heart pounding. The whispering voices grew louder, and the temperature plummeted. The air was thick with an ancient energy, one that Miller couldn't comprehend. The monument's surface began to glow brighter, revealing more symbols beneath the ones he had already uncovered. These symbols were different, bolder, more distinct. And then, as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, the ground cracked open. A dark, yawning abyss appeared before him, as though the earth itself had split apart to reveal what lay beneath. Miller's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a monument. It was a gateway, A portal. A portal to the past, to a time long before the war, when something dark had happened here in Bastogne. Something that had been sealed away. Until now. The air grew thick with the presence of something ancient, something not meant for human eyes. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and Miller could almost feel the presence of thousands of lost souls trapped in this place for eternity. And then, from the depths of the abyss, something emerged. A figure, clad in tattered armor, its face hidden beneath a rusted helmet. It stepped out of the shadows, dragging its sword behind it, the metal scraping against the stone floor. For a moment, Miller froze. The figure was nothing like the others. This one was different. It stepped closer, its presence oppressive, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. You opened the door," the figure said, its voice a low growl, reverberating in the air around them. "Now, you will learn the truth." Miller didn't have time to react. The figure lunged at him with a speed that defied human understanding, its sword raised high. In that moment, everything became clear to Miller. The past had never truly left. It was still here, hidden in the fog, in the land itself. The soldiers, the spirits, they were all part of a curse that had been born long before the war, something ancient and malevolent that had bound this place in a never-ending cycle. And now, the curse had come full circle. The final secret was that Bastogne wasn't just a battlefield, it was a prison. Miller barely had time to react as the figure swung, its sword at him, its movement swift and unnerving. He scrambled back, dodging the blade by mere inches. His heart was pounding, his thoughts racing. How was this possible? How could a figure from the past be alive, no, here, in front of him? The figure swung again, its eyes burning with an ancient fury. Miller barely managed to roll out of the way in time, his pulse racing as the sword cleaved through the air just above his head. He wasn't sure how long he had been in the cavern beneath the monument, but it felt like time itself had warped. Every breath he took seemed heavier, thicker, as if the very air was resisting his presence. The fog outside had grown denser, swallowing everything in its path. With one final, desperate push, Miller darted toward the edge of the abyss. He needed to escape. He needed to survive. But as he glanced back, the figure wasn't following him. It was standing at the edge of the abyss, watching him with those burning eyes. "You cannot escape," the figure's voice boomed, shaking the very ground beneath Miller's feet. "This place is yours now. You have awakened what should have remained forgotten." Miller's mind raced. He had come for answers, but now all he had were more questions. The fog, the soldiers, the ancient monument. Everything was connected in ways he still couldn't fully grasp. But one thing was clear. The battle he had fought on the battlefield was nothing compared to the battle he now faced. The ancient curse of Bastogne had returned. The spirits were restless. And it wasn't just the dead that were trapped here. It was the living, too. As Miller scrambled to escape, the world around him began to collapse. The ground shook violently, the air turned cold, and the fog seemed to pulse with a life of its own, closing in, tightening around him. The figure's presence lingered, and the whispers in the air grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to drag him back into the depths. Miller didn't know how to stop it, how to end it. All he knew was that he couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever force had trapped this land, whatever curse had bound it, was pulling him deeper into its grip. The fog was no longer just a physical presence. It was a force that could bend time, bend reality itself. And the moment he had opened that monument, the moment he had uncovered the truth, he had sealed his fate. The past had returned. and it would not let him go. The ground beneath Miller trembled, and the fog seemed to take on a life of its own. He couldn't see more than a few feet in front of him, the world around him warping as the past collided with the present. His breath came in shallow, desperate gasps. He had opened the door to something far darker than he could have ever imagined, and now it was closing in on him. The figure, the soldier from the past, had vanished from view, but Miller could still feel its presence, looming like a shadow, just beyond his reach. The whispers, too, were still there, swirling around him like 1,000 voices trying to drown him in their endless secrets. The fog thickened, and with it, Miller's sense of reality seemed to blur. He wasn't sure if the things he was seeing were real anymore, or if they were just figments of his own mind, unraveling under the pressure of everything he had experienced. But there was one thing he was certain of. He had to confront it. He had to face whatever had been awakened by his presence in this place. Whatever curse was tying this land to the spirits of the past. It needed to be stopped. Miller moved deeper into the fog, his mind racing, piecing together everything he had learned. The whispers in the air had told him the truth that had been hidden for centuries. The land of Bastogne wasn't just a battlefield. It was a prison, a place where souls were trapped, bound by an ancient force that had never truly died. It was then that he saw it again, the glowing figure, the soldier, standing at the edge of the abyss. This time it wasn't just an apparition. This time it was fully real. The figure raised its sword high, its hollow eyes staring into Miller's soul. "You've come to end it," it said, its voice as cold as the wind that whipped through the trees. "But you cannot. The past is here. It has always been here." Miller took a step forward, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his chest. "I'm not here to end it. I'm here to understand it. I need to know why this is happening. Why are the spirits trapped here? Why does the fog keep returning?" The figure lowered its sword, its presence looming larger than before. For the first time, it seemed to hesitate. "The fog is the barrier," it said softly. "The land is bound by a curse that was forged in the blood of those who fought here long before your time. They never left because they were never meant to leave. Their souls are bound to this place, trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth." Miller's heart sank. This was worse than he had imagined. The spirits, the figures, the strange occurrences, they weren't random. They were the echoes of a forgotten past, a past that had never truly been laid to rest. "What do you want from me?" Miller asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure's eyes burned brighter, its presence now overwhelming. "We want peace," it said, its voice thick with sorrow. "We have been waiting for someone to break the cycle, but the key to our release lies in the land itself. In the monument you found. You have opened the door, but you must now choose. Will you close it and seal our fate once more? Or will you leave it open and let us finally rest?" Miller's mind spun. The decision was impossible. If he closed the door, would he be condemning these restless souls to another eternity of torment? But if he left it open, would he be unleashing something far worse? He couldn't make the choice alone. He needed more answers, more time. But the figure was growing impatient. "The time is running out," it said, its voice becoming more urgent. "The door can't stay open forever." With his heart pounding in his chest, Miller made his decision. He wasn't going to let the spirits remain trapped forever. But he couldn't simply leave the door open and risk the unknown horrors it might unleash. He had to find a way to stop the cycle without condemning the souls to eternal torment. But what was the solution? Was there even one? Miller stepped forward, his eyes locked on the figure, and with a voice that was filled with both determination and fear, he spoke the only words that made sense. "I'm not closing the door. I'm finding a way to free you." The figure's eyes widened. For a moment, there was silence. The fog that had once seemed so suffocating lifted, if only slightly. The presence of the figure became less oppressive, less threatening. It seemed as though Miller's words had caused a shift in the air itself. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The figure nodded slowly, as though weighing his words, its long, hollow form still looming in front of him. "You do not understand what you are saying," it said, its voice distant, almost regretful. "To free us is to shatter the bonds that hold this land together. If you do this, you risk more than the souls that are trapped here. You risk the fabric of reality itself." Miller's heart pounded in his chest. He had suspected it would come to this, but the weight of it now felt unbearable. The world around him seemed to be trembling, as if the very ground could split open and swallow him whole. "I don't have a choice," Miller said, his voice low but steady. "I can't leave this place like it is. There's something here, something more than just the fog and the spirits. If I don't try to stop it, who knows what will happen next?" The figure seemed to consider this for a long moment, its glowing eyes scanning Miller with a kind of weariness that spoke of centuries of suffering. "You will need to find the heart of the curse," it finally said, its voice low. "The monument you uncovered is not just a door. It is a key, but that key has no power unless you find the source of the curse that binds this place." Miller's mind raced. The heart of the curse. Where was it? What did it mean? "The heart of the curse is hidden," the figure continued, its voice becoming fainter. "In the ground, in the roots of the land itself. It is buried beneath the battlefield, beneath the blood that was spilled here long ago." Miller nodded, a sense of clarity cutting through the fog of uncertainty. He had to go back. He had to return to the heart of Bastogne and uncover the source of the curse that had never allowed the land to rest. As he turned to leave, the figure's voice echoed one final time in his ears. "Be warned, Private. What you will uncover will change everything. The truth is not kind, and the end may not be what you expect." The fog parted as Miller walked away, the path ahead of him still unclear. But one thing was certain. He had a purpose now. The final confrontation was not yet over. The heart of the curse awaited him, and he would stop at nothing to uncover it. The path ahead of Miller seemed to stretch on endlessly, swallowed by the oppressive fog. Every step he took felt like a battle against something far greater than the enemy soldiers he had once faced. This wasn't war. This wasn't something he could fight with a rifle or a grenade. What lay before him was beyond comprehension, beyond the power of anything man-made. His thoughts raced. The words of the figure still echoed in his mind. "The heart of the curse is hidden, buried beneath the blood that was spilled here long ago. The battlefield, the source of the curse. It was all connected to the land beneath his feet, the land soaked in the blood of soldiers, both Allied and German, all those years ago." Miller didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but his gut told him he had to return to the battlefield, to the heart of Bastogne, where the worst of the fighting had occurred. The place where the land itself seemed to throb with the weight of death. The fog there was unlike any other. It had the smell of something ancient, something that had lain dormant, waiting for someone to disturb it. He couldn't escape. The land itself wouldn't let him. Miller made his way to the site of the battle, the fog growing thicker with every step, wrapping around him like a living, breathing thing. He had already seen the figures, the soldiers who never left, the souls trapped in this endless cycle. Now he had to face what had kept them here, the true source of the curse. As he reached the battlefield, he could feel the ground vibrating beneath him, as though the earth itself were reacting to his presence. The fog parted just enough for him to see the remnants of the war. The crumbling bunkers, the shattered trees, the ruins of the battle that had once raged here. It was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. But this silence was different. It was not the quiet of peace, but the stillness of something waiting. Miller knelt down and placed his hand on the earth. The soil was cold, unnaturally cold, and he could feel a strange pulse beneath the surface, like the heartbeat of the land itself. He wasn't sure what he was searching for, but he knew it was here. He began to dig, his hands tearing through the earth with frantic determination. The ground seemed to resist him, as if it were alive, fighting to keep its secrets hidden. But Miller didn't stop. He had to find it. He had to uncover the truth. And then, after what felt like hours, his fingers brushed something cold, something metallic. With a final, desperate shove, Miller unearthed it. A rusted, ancient chest, buried deep in the earth. It was adorned with strange symbols, the same symbols he had seen on the monument, on the trees, on the stone. This was it, the heart of the curse. As he opened the chest, a dark, inky smoke began to seep out, swirling around him like a living entity. The fog thickened, and the whispers returned, louder than ever before, filling his ears with a cacophony of voices. "You found it," they whispered. "You've awakened it. Now you must face the consequences." Miller stumbled back, his heart racing. The smoke swirled faster, filling the air, taking shape until it manifested into something horrifying. A figure, a creature, half human, half shadow, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. It towered over Miller, its form shifting and twisting in the fog. "You shouldn't have come," the figure growled, its voice like the screeching of metal. "You have disturbed what was meant to be forgotten. Now you will join us in eternal torment." Miller stood frozen, his mind racing. The figure was the embodiment of the curse, a being bound to the land, born from the bloodshed and the suffering of the past. It was more than a spirit. It was the source of everything, the force that had kept the souls trapped here, the force that had created the fog, the apparitions. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. The curse was not just about the soldiers, it was about the land itself. The violence, the bloodshed, the never-ending cycle of death and war had infected the very earth. And now, it was too late to undo what had been set in motion. Miller had one choice. He had to destroy the curse, even if it meant sacrificing himself to do it. He reached for his rifle, knowing that it was useless against the creature before him, but the thought of running never crossed his mind. There was nowhere to run. He had to end it. He had to stop the cycle of suffering that had plagued this place for centuries. The figure lunged at him, its claws extended, but Miller was ready. He hurled the chest into the air, and with a cry, he detonated the explosives he had planted earlier. The force of the explosion sent him flying backward, the sound deafening, the shockwave rattling his bones. As the smoke cleared, the creature was gone. The fog began to dissipate, the whispers fading into silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air was still. Miller lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his heart racing. The battlefield was quiet once more. The land, once cursed, now felt lighter, as though the weight of centuries had been lifted. But as Miller sat up, he felt something cold wash over him. The battle was over, yes, but the truth was more complicated. The fog was gone, the spirits no longer trapped, but the land still held a secret. The curse may have been broken, but the memory of it would never fade. And as Miller stood, he heard one final whisper, lingering in the wind, a reminder that some stories never truly end. Do the warrior spirits truly rest in peace? Or are they still lurking somewhere, waiting for the day to return? This story has come to an end, but the questions remain. Was the curse truly lifted? Or does Bastogne still carry the weight of its haunted past? We'll never truly know. Some things are better left unsaid, hidden in the fog. Thank you for following this journey into the unknown. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of mystery and suspense. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think happened after Miller walked away from the battlefield? Is the fog truly gone, or is there more lurking in the darkness? Leave your comments below and let us know. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to join us in our future journeys. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, some mysteries are never fully solved.